In a city ruled by fear, where every street belonged to shadows and every corner hid a threat, there lived a man more feared than the darkness itself. A mafia boss, silent, ruthless, unstoppable. A man whose name made gangs tremble long before they saw his face. But everything changed the day he witnessed something even he couldn't ignore. A van full of students trapped in the jaws of a rising criminal gang. What happened next was not a fight, it was a storm. One man against an entire underworld, and the underworld lost. He destroyed the gang that dared to target innocents, carving his warning into the bones of the city. But fate wasn't finished with him. Years later, when another group of predators tried to repeat that same cruelty, he returned like a ghost of vengeance, faster, stronger, colder than ever. He saved the students again, but this time something unexpected happened. Among those frightened faces was someone who saw him not as a monster, but as a protector. A girl whose eyes softened the storm inside him, whose presence cracked open a heart buried under years of blood and silence. This is the story of a man forged in darkness, who became the shield of the innocent without ever asking for forgiveness. A story where violence meets vulnerability, where shadows meet light, and where one unexpected encounter turns a feared king of the underworld into something he never believed he could be: human. The city had long been a battleground of shadows, a place where ambition and brutality mixed like storm clouds above rooftops. Streets trembled under the weight of criminals who stalked the alleys with hungry eyes, and people walked with hearts lodged in their throats, praying to reach home safely. Yet in that chaos, one figure maintained a reputation no one dared challenge. The mafia boss moved like a ghost among the living, feared not because of noise, but because of silence. Where others roared, he simply appeared, dealing justice in ways that made men vanish from the records of life. He was a force people whispered about, a name that made even street dogs go quiet. But even he had lines he had never imagined crossing, until the day innocence collided with violence before his eyes. It began as a routine day, the kind he usually ignored. His world consisted of territory lines, weapon shipments, and men who swore loyalty until disloyalty seemed easier. He was used to betrayal, blood, and harsh lessons carved into the skin of the city. Nothing surprised him anymore. At least that was what he believed. But fate often waits for the unguarded moment to strike a different chord. He was driving through the old industrial district, a place where peeling factories leaned like tired elders and smokestacks pointed accusing fingers at the heavens. He preferred this route because it was quiet and allowed him to think without interruption. As he passed the abandoned warehouse road, he saw something unusual: dust rising, followed by erratic movement. It made him slow down out of instinct rather than curiosity. Through the haze of dust, his gaze locked onto a school van surrounded by armed men. The vehicle was old, painted in cheerful colors that didn't match the grim reality unfolding around it. Tiny hands pressed against windows, shadows trembling inside as fear hovered over the children. The gang surrounding the van moved with an aggressive urgency, their intentions clear even from a distance. They were not trying to steal the vehicle. They were trying to use it, damage it, or worse, break whatever innocence it carried. The mafia boss felt something shift inside him, a cold tightening that he didn't immediately understand. Children were never part of the underworld's game. They were supposed to be untouched, invisible to the cruelty that stitched the city together. Seeing them trapped like prey aggravated something deeply buried within him. He did not imagine himself a savior. His hands had taken lives, ruined families, and shaped empires built on suffering. Yet something in that moment refused to let him walk away. The gang surrounding the van was known to him, a wild, unorganized crew driven more by desperation than strategy. They had been causing trouble in the lower blocks, attacking shops, snatching money, and creating their own twisted name. Their presence had irritated him for months, but this was different. This was unacceptable in a way that transcended criminal codes. It was a violation of a boundary he never allowed crossed. Without planning or hesitation, he pulled his vehicle to a stop and stepped out, walking toward them with a calmness that masked an internal storm. The encounter was swift, brutal, and merciless. His mind moved faster than sound, calculating angles, predicting reactions, and erasing threats one by one. Though the children could not hear his thoughts or see the years of violence etched into his instincts, they witnessed the storm outside as shapes fell, shadows collapsed, and danger evaporated. When the dust settled, the gang lay defeated, their ambitions extinguished before they ever fully burned. The Mafia boss stood amidst the wreckage, chest rising with steady breaths, feeling an unfamiliar quiet bloom inside him. The van's driver peeked out only long enough to speed away in fear, taking the children far from what they had seen. He didn't blame them. For a man like him, gratitude was never expected. What stayed with him was not the fight, but the sight of those frightened faces. Their innocence was a reminder of a world he had long abandoned, a life he once imagined but never lived. Saving them had not been planned, yet it awakened a sense of responsibility he thought had died. That moment marked a shift in him, a stirring of purpose beyond the empire he had built. It wasn't redemption. He didn't believe in such fantasies. It was something quieter, a simple realization that some battles were worth fighting not for territory or reputation, but because they protected what little goodness remained in the city. News traveled fast. Criminal networks operated like veins, carrying whispers through the city with speed faster than any human messenger. By evening, every gang knew what had happened. The Mafia boss had intervened in a matter that wasn't his, and he had wiped out a squad that belonged to an expanding gang notorious for their recklessness. The gang's leaders took the message as a declaration of war. They were not intelligent men, but they were hungry, reckless, and eager to prove themselves. They saw the incident as an insult, a stain on their rising reputation. Instead of backing down, they saw it as a challenge. The city braced itself for the storm that would come, but no one knew how violently it would unfold. The Mafia boss, however, did not wait for retaliation. He understood the psychology of men who sought power out of desperation. They would not forgive, nor would they forget. Allowing them to regroup meant allowing them to grow more dangerous. And though he rarely admitted it, the image of the school children still flickered in his mind, like a candle flame refusing to die. If the gang dared to harm innocents once, they would dare again. He could not allow that. Something deep inside him demanded finality, demanded that the threat be erased so thoroughly that no trace remained. He spent the following night studying the gang's structure, territory, weaknesses, and leaders. His network, built over years of calculated dominance, provided him with every detail he needed. He learned names, schedules, secret hideouts, and plans. The more he discovered, the more disgusted he became. These men had no code, no discipline, no sense of honor. They targeted the weak because they feared the strong. They attacked the helpless because it made them feel powerful. Such men were not competitors. They were parasites. And parasites, in his world, deserved eradication. When the time was right, he struck. The attack on the school van had not been random, and the Mafia boss knew it. It was part of a pattern, a sign of a gang that was becoming bold enough to use terror as a calling card. In the days following the incident, he allowed the city to breathe in the illusion of normalcy while he moved like a shadow behind the scenes. Every contact he had ever cultivated, every spy hidden in back alleys and gambling dens, was set in motion. He did not roar his intentions to the world. He simply gathered information with relentless patience. Names surfaced, faces were identified, hideouts were quietly mapped. The gang that believed itself to be rising was, without knowing it, already being surrounded. He began dismantling them piece by piece. It was never loud in the beginning. A supply line went missing one night. Weapons that were supposed to arrive in crates never reached their buyers. A mid-level leader disappeared on his way home, swallowed by the unseen machinery of the underworld. Money that was meant to fund operations vanished from hidden stashes, leaving the gang scrambling to understand who was targeting them. Fear spread across their ranks like an infection, invisible yet steadily weakening their unity. The Mafia boss watched this decline with a cold clarity, knowing well that psychological destruction often did more damage than bullets. Yet he was not doing this merely for strategic satisfaction. Something deeper pushed him forward, a quiet sense of responsibility that had nothing to do with his usual motives. His empire had always thrived in controlled chaos, but this gang threatened to turn the city into a playground of senseless brutality. If they continued on this path, more innocents would be caught in the crossfire. The memory of trembling children behind dusty windows stayed stubbornly alive in his thoughts. It was a reminder that some wounds, once inflicted, never fully heal. He had the power to prevent that from repeating, and however dark his soul might be, he could not ignore that obligation. As the gang struggled to reorganize, their leaders made desperate moves. They shifted their operations, tried to conceal their locations, and reached out to corrupt officials for protection. Some of those officials hesitated, afraid of being caught between a ruthless gang and an even more ruthless mafia boss. Others tried to play both sides, feeding small pieces of information to each group in the hope of preserving their own safety. But the city had long ago taught the boss how to see through such games. He followed the trail of betrayal with surgical precision, punishing those who enabled chaos and rewarding those who helped restore his version of order. In his mind, he was not defending the law, he was defending balance. Eventually, subtle strikes were no longer enough. The time came for a direct confrontation, for a blow so devastating that it would erase the gang's presence from the city entirely. The boss identified their main gathering point, an old warehouse district on the outskirts, a place forgotten by the world but repurposed by criminals as a nest. Trucks came and went at odd hours, lights flickered through broken windows, and the distant echo of music sometimes carried through the empty streets. To outsiders, it might have looked like a simple hideout. To him, it was a tumor that needed to be cut out in one decisive operation. He prepared with the same meticulous care that had built his empire. His most trusted men were gathered, not with flamboyant speeches or promises of glory, but with precise instructions. Each knew their role, their path, their target. The boss did not rely on brute force alone. He layered his strategy with contingencies, anticipating escape routes, ambush points, and possible reinforcements. To him, this was not just a battle. It was the end of a threat that dared to endanger the innocent. He would show them that their cruelty carried a price no one could afford. Night fell heavy over the district as the operation began. Roads that were usually empty hosted silent vehicles that slipped into position like pieces on a chessboard. The air felt dense, holding its breath as if the city itself was waiting for a verdict. Inside the warehouse complex, the gang carried on with their noisy bravado, unaware of the tightening noose around them. They had heard rumors that someone was hunting them, but none of them truly believed the storm would come so suddenly or so completely. Arrogance shielded them from reality, and that arrogance would be their downfall. The attack ignited with ruthless efficiency. Entrances were sealed before anyone could flee. Exits were blocked with calculated precision. The boss moved through the chaos like a silent storm, every motion controlled, every step measured. Gunfire echoed across the abandoned buildings, mixing with shouts and the crashing of metal. What had once been a sanctuary for the gang turned into their cage. One by one, their fighters fell, not in glorious duels, but in brutal, decisive exchanges that left no room for recovery. There was no mercy, no hesitation. The boss had made his choice long before that night. These men were not opponents, but a spreading plague, and he was the cure. When the dust finally settled, the warehouse district lay quiet. The once booming heart of the gang's operations was reduced to silence and scattered debris. Those who survived fled the city, or went so deep into hiding that they might as well have ceased to exist. The Mafia boss stood in the middle of what remained, breathing in the heavy air, aware that something had changed both outside and within. He had done worse things in his life, committed acts that would forever stain his soul, yet this felt different. This felt, in a twisted way, justified. Word of the destruction spread rapidly. The city's underworld reacted with a mixture of awe and fear. No one doubted now that the boss had drawn a firm line. Anyone who threatened innocence, even by accident, would pay dearly. Some criminals recalibrated their activities, avoiding schools, public transport, and areas where ordinary families lived. It was not morality guiding them, but fear of consequences. Still, the result was the same. Certain zones, once vulnerable, slowly grew safer. Parents noticed that their children could walk a little more freely, that the tightness in their chests loosened, even if they did not know whom to thank. The Mafia boss never sought their gratitude. He preferred anonymity in these rare acts of unintended protection. Authorities, of course, noticed the shift. Police reports reflected a sudden drop in violent incidents attributed to the dismantled gang. At the same time, they saw a spike in whispers about the boss's expanding influence. Some officers were relieved that one source of chaos had been removed, even if they would never admit it aloud. Others worried that consolidating power in the hands of one criminal, no matter how controlled, was dangerous in its own way. To them, he was not a guardian, but a different kind of threat, one that simply wore discipline like armor. Yet they were powerless to move against him without triggering a war they were not prepared to fight. The Mafia boss retreated into his world, appearing once more as the enigmatic figure who guided his organization with a detached calm. Outwardly, nothing about him seemed softer or more human. His commands remained sharp, his presence as intimidating as ever. But in private, when the noise of business faded, he sometimes found his thoughts drifting back to the school van. He wondered how many of those children still remembered that day, or if their minds had mercifully blurred the memory into something distant. He hoped, for their sake, that they could grow beyond the fear. If he had done anything of value, perhaps it was giving them a chance at a life that did not revolve around danger. Time moved on, as it always does. The city adapted to the new balance of power, reshaping itself around invisible boundaries that only a few truly understood. The gang he had destroyed became a cautionary tale, a whispered reminder of what happened to those who crossed lines they had no right crossing. New criminals tried to rise, but many did so more carefully, aware that someone was watching from the shadows. Despite this enforced restraint, the city never became peaceful. Violence still lurked under the surface, waiting for opportunities. Yet there was a strange kind of order threading through the chaos, an unspoken rule that certain things remained off limits. For the Mafia boss, the episode with the school van and the subsequent war imprinted itself as a turning point in his internal logic. He did not speak of it, did not seek confessions or comfort. He simply carried the memory like a hidden scar, one that occasionally burned when he saw children crossing roads in groups or riding in buses painted in bright, hopeful colors. It did not cleanse him, did not make him a hero, but it grounded him in a way nothing else had. He had always controlled fear. Now, for the first time in years, he had also controlled cruelty, directing it not at the weak, but at those who preyed on them. Years would pass before he understood that this was only the beginning, that fate was already weaving new threads that would once again drag him into the path of innocence and danger. For now, he believed the conflict had ended. He had destroyed the gang that dared to target children. The city had settled into a new rhythm. Life went on, buildings aged, seasons changed. He returned to the familiar routines of his empire, unaware that somewhere in the future, another van, another set of students, and another choice would stand before him, demanding once again that he decide what kind of monster he truly was. The years that followed brought a deceptive calm to the city, the kind that settles like dust after a storm, but never truly disappears. Beneath the surface, tensions continued to shift and simmer, waiting for the moment when pressure would break through again. The Mafia boss moved through this evolving landscape with the same quiet dominance that had always defined him. His empire remained intact, his reputation untouched, and his watch over the streets as unyielding as ever. Yet something subtle had changed inside him, a thread woven from the memory of frightened children and a van trembling under the threat of violence. He did not acknowledge it openly, but the experience lingered in the corners of his mind, shaping decisions in ways even he did not fully comprehend. He became more observant of the areas around schools and colleges, his route shifting ever so slightly to pass through streets filled with the laughter of students. It was not sentimentality, nor was it guilt. It was an instinct that had grown roots in him, a sense of responsibility that had not existed before. Whenever he witnessed groups of students, chatting, running, living freely without understanding the hidden dangers of the city, he felt a strange reassurance. They symbolized a part of the world he had long been shut out of, a world untouched by the corruption that guided his every move. He did not begrudge them their innocence. Instead, he silently protected it from afar, like a shadow that refused to let darkness swallow them. Time continued its steady march, bringing with it new players who sought to claim pieces of the city's power. Some arrived quietly, trying to blend into existing networks. Others attempted to challenge established leaders with reckless bravado. Yet none were bold enough to repeat the mistakes of the gang he had destroyed. Targeting innocents had become an unspoken taboo, a line etched deep into the minds of criminals who feared the consequences of crossing it. Even those who had no respect for rules learned quickly that some boundaries, once broken, were met with an answer that left no survivors. Despite this temporary stability, the city had a way of generating chaos where none seemed possible. One night, a fleeting incident caught the Mafia boss's attention, an event so small that others might have dismissed it, but to him, it signaled the beginning of something unsettling. A college van had been reported missing for several hours before being found abandoned near the northern district. No students were harmed, no valuables were missing, and no gang claimed responsibility. The official explanation offered by authorities was mechanical failure, yet he sensed that the truth was buried somewhere beneath that convenient excuse. He trusted his instincts, honed by years of navigating deception and danger, and those instincts told him that the incident was anything but accidental. In the days that followed, he observed an increase in strange movements near the edges of the city. Unfamiliar vehicles slipped in and out of abandoned lots, suspicious figures lingered near public transport routes, and small-scale disturbances began appearing in isolated corners of neighborhoods usually untouched by trouble. To the general public, these incidents seemed disconnected, just minor ripples in the routine unpredictability of urban life. But to a man like him, patterns formed quickly. He recognized the early signs of a gang testing boundaries, probing weak points, and preparing for something larger. His concerns deepened when one of his informants reported whispers about a new group rising from outside the city limits. Unlike the reckless gang he had crushed years ago, this group was organized, patient, and strategic. They stayed away from major confrontations, preferring to study their environment before choosing targets. Their cautious behavior made them more dangerous, not less. Men driven by impulse were predictable, but men driven by method could cause destruction that spread far beyond expectations. And as he tracked their movements, a chilling realization settled into his thoughts. Their interests seemed to circle around college routes, student gatherings, and transport patterns. The Mafia boss felt the old spark ignite inside him, the same spark that had pushed him into action the day he saw the school van surrounded by predators. He understood what was unfolding, even before the rest of the city had begun to feel threatened. Once again, innocence was being placed dangerously close to the hunger of men who sought power. And once again, he felt the weight of decision pressing against him. He did not pretend to be noble, but he knew he could not ignore this. The scars of the past had shaped him too deeply to stand aside and watch history repeat itself. He dispatched scouts to gather more information, extending his network's reach into districts he rarely interfered with. These scouts returned with reports confirming his fears. The new gang had begun observing specific college vans, following them from a distance, mapping their routes, and learning their schedules. They were not acting out of vandalism or random malice. Their intentions were calculated, likely aimed at using the students as leverage for some larger scheme. The boss understood that once criminals step into the realm of exploiting innocence, their descent becomes rapid and irreversible. He could not allow a situation to evolve into something catastrophic. One late afternoon, as he passed by a busy intersection near one of the city's major colleges, he noticed a gathering of students waiting for their transportation. Their voices rose in carefree chatter, their faces glowing with the simplicity of youth. The sight stirred something inside him, not envy, not regret, but a reminder of what he had silently vowed to protect. Their ease contrasted sharply with the danger creeping toward them, a danger they were blissfully unaware of. He studied the area more closely, sensing unfamiliar presences in parked cars and on nearby rooftops. These were watchers, patient predators waiting for an opportune moment. He began following the student van discreetly over the next several days. Its routine remained consistent: pick up in the morning, drop off in the afternoon, occasional variations depending on the schedule of the students. It was a soft target, predictable, lightly guarded, and filled with individuals who held no awareness of the threats looming in their environment. For the Mafia boss, the situation carried a sense of inevitability. The gang's preparations were too deliberate, too focused, for them to abandon their plans easily. Something terrible was being orchestrated, and he could feel the tension building each day like an invisible tide rising toward a breaking point. Then the moment arrived. It was a cloudy evening, the sky heavy with an oppressive stillness. Students boarded the van as usual, unaware of the danger that had been stalking them. The boss trailed behind at a distance, his senses alert, his mind tracing patterns in the movements around him. As the van eased into a quieter street, he noticed two vehicles closing in from opposite directions. A motorcycle emerged from a side alley, accelerating in a suspicious arc behind the van. The gang had chosen their moment well. They were attempting to trap the van in a narrow zone where escape was nearly impossible. Without hesitation, the Mafia boss accelerated toward the unfolding scene, his instincts blazing to life. This was no time for planning or deliberation. The safety of the students was slipping into the hands of predators, who would not hesitate to harm them. The boss understood the gravity of the situation instantly. If the gang succeeded in surrounding the van, the consequences would be devastating, unleashing chaos that would spread beyond the immediate victims. The students inside the van were seconds away from falling into a nightmare they could never have imagined, a nightmare he had sworn to prevent the moment he stepped in front of that first school van years ago. The tension of the moment carved itself deep into his thoughts as he prepared to intervene. The shadows he had once commanded with ease seemed to gather behind him again, forming a familiar cloak of silent power. He felt no fear, no doubt, only an unbroken drive to destroy whatever threatened what little innocence remained untouched in his city. He moved forward, ready to unleash the storm once more, unaware that this rescue would alter the course of his life in ways he had never foreseen, drawing him into a path that would bind him not only to violence, but to a connection he never expected to make. The narrow street became a crucible of tension as the Mafia boss advanced toward the unfolding trap, every sense sharpened by the familiarity of danger. The college van, oblivious to its fate, rolled steadily into the confinement created by approaching vehicles. The gang executing the ambush had chosen their location precisely, selecting a strip of road enclosed by abandoned shops and walls stained with years of neglect. It was the kind of place where screams would vanish into cracked concrete and peeling paint, where the world could pretend nothing was happening just a few feet away. The Mafia boss understood the weight of such places. They were graves disguised as streets. As he closed the distance, his mind computed every angle, every threat, every second that separated the students from the irreversible. The first vehicle attempted to block the van from the front, swerving aggressively and halting in a way that forced the student van's driver to brake sharply. Panic rippled through the interior. Although the children could not fully see what was happening, they could sense the rawness in the air. The second vehicle began closing in from behind, its darkened windows concealing the intentions inside. Meanwhile, the motorcycle positioned itself by the van's left side, limiting its ability to maneuver. The gang had designed the trap with a predatory intelligence, ensuring that escape seemed impossible. But they had not accounted for the presence of the one man who had already destroyed a criminal empire for daring to threaten innocence. The Mafia boss accelerated, his vehicle slicing through the tension like a silent blade. His approach was unseen until the final moments, allowing him to break the formation the gang had built with the force of a sudden storm. He cut between the motorcycle and the van with precise timing, forcing the biker to veer away to avoid collision. The sudden disruption created a narrow gap, small enough to be missed by inexperienced eyes, but wide enough for him to exploit. In that moment, the gang realized they were not executing a seamless ambush. They were being interrupted by a force they had underestimated. The boss stepped out of his vehicle with calm control, his presence freezing the scene into momentary stillness. He carried no expression of anger or panic. His movements were measured, grounded in experience rather than impulse. The gang members reacted with confusion, unsure whether to attack, flee, or complete their original plan. Their hesitation offered him a fleeting advantage, one he used with lethal precision. The confrontation unfolded swiftly, the sound of struggle echoing across the enclosed street. The students inside the van heard the chaos, but could not grasp its details. To them, the world outside had transformed into a storm of threats and salvation intertwined. The Mafia boss dismantled the ambush with unrelenting focus. Each threat was neutralized with movements molded by years of combat, instincts that operated faster than conscious thought. He moved like a shadow sculpting the night, extinguishing danger with an efficiency that left no room for recovery. The gang had prepared for a routine kidnapping, not for the wrath of a man whose reputation had become legend. They had not anticipated crossing paths with someone who had once leveled an entire criminal network for a similar crime. As the last attacker faltered, realization dawned too late. They were not hunters, but intruders in a territory guarded by an unseen predator. When the street finally grew quiet, the van remained frozen, its doors locked, its passengers trembling. The Mafia boss did not approach to reassure them. He understood the fear his presence could ignite. Instead, he secured the area, ensuring no additional threats lingered nearby. The gang members who survived the initial confrontation fled into surrounding alleys, abandoning their plan entirely. The boss watched them disappear, knowing their escape would not last long. Criminals driven by desperation often returned, clinging to vengeance as their final illusion of power. But he would deal with them soon enough. For the moment, the safety of the students was the priority, even if they never understood the depths of his intervention. The van eventually continued its journey, guided by a driver who could barely contain the trembling in his hands. The boss stayed behind, surveying the remnants of the conflict. The silence that followed contrasted sharply with the violence that had erupted moments earlier. He stood amidst the stillness, breathing slowly, aware that the incident marked the beginning of something larger. This gang was not like the one he had eradicated years ago. They were strategic, observant, and willing to target vulnerable individuals if it furthered their ambitions. Their willingness to attack a moving vehicle filled with students revealed a dangerous inclination, one that could lead to escalating acts of terror if left unchecked. As he walked away from the scene, the boss began piecing together his next steps. He understood that the ambush was not a random act. It was part of a larger operation, likely orchestrated by leaders who preferred to remain unseen. The gang's movements had been too precise to be spontaneous. Their scouting patterns, their timing, and their coordination suggested a plan designed to test the city's response. They had been probing weakness, measuring how quickly law enforcement or rival factions would react. What they had not expected was an intervention from someone outside their calculations, someone who navigated the underworld with an authority they had not yet learned to fear. The boss knew that his involvement would not remain hidden for long. Word had a way of traveling through criminal channels, carried by whispers and frightened breaths. In the coming days, the gang would learn his identity, realize the magnitude of the force they had provoked, and respond in a way fueled by a mixture of fear and defiance. He anticipated their retaliation, not with anxiety, but with a calm certainty. He had lived long enough in the shadows to understand the cycle of aggression and retribution. If they chose to escalate, he would meet their escalation with decisive brutality. If they attempted to disappear, he would hunt them until their influence evaporated from the city entirely. Regardless of their choice, the ending would be the same. He spent the following nights tracking their movements, gathering intelligence, and eliminating key members in quiet operations that left no trace. His actions created ripples of fear within the gang, causing fractures to form between their ranks. Distrust began to poison their unity, as each member questioned whether betrayal lurked within their own group. The boss used this division to dismantle their structure from within, weakening them without needing to engage in large-scale confrontation. His methodical approach resembled the slow tightening of a noose, drawing the gang closer to its inevitable demise. But something unusual occurred during his pursuit, an unexpected complication that drifted subtly into his path. Among the students who had been in the van during the ambush was a young woman whose life would soon intertwine with his in ways he never anticipated. She had been seated near the window during the attack, and although she had not seen his face clearly, she recognized the silhouette of the man who had protected them. For days afterward, she found herself unable to shake the image of that silent protector, a figure who had stepped into chaos with an inexplicable sense of purpose. She did not know him, nor did she understand the darkness that surrounded his world, yet something about his presence lingered in her thoughts like an unfinished story. Her curiosity grew slowly, sparked by a mixture of gratitude and fascination. She had lived her life untouched by the harsh realities of the underworld, shielded by the safety of routine and academia. Encountering someone whose existence thrived in danger stirred a feeling she could not fully define. To her, he became a mystery wrapped in the fragments of a moment she could not forget. Meanwhile, the Mafia boss remained unaware of the impact he had made on her life. He focused solely on dismantling the gang that had endangered the students, determined to erase every trace of their influence. Yet fate, indifferent to his intentions, was quietly pulling two lives closer together, setting the stage for a connection forged not through peace, but through the echoes of violence. As the final pieces of the gang began to collapse, he sensed that this chapter of conflict was nearing its end. But he also felt the stirrings of something new on the horizon, an unfamiliar shift in the rhythm of his existence. He did not yet understand its nature, but he felt it approaching, subtle yet inevitable, like the calm before a different kind of storm. The collapse of the gang unfolded like a slow-burning fire, devouring everything it touched until only ashes remained. The Mafia boss watched the decline with calculated patience, ensuring that every thread of their influence unraveled completely. He struck quietly where it counted most, dismantling their operations, severing their connections, and crushing the confidence that had once driven them to target the innocent. With each passing day, their power withered, leaving them desperate, fractured, and incapable of mounting any real retaliation. The city began to regain a sense of stability, unaware of the silent war waged in its shadows. Yet even as victory approached, a subtle shift lingered in the air, something that had nothing to do with violence or strategy. It stemmed from an unexpected source, one he had not foreseen and did not know how to confront. The young woman who had been in the ambushed college and found herself unable to forget the silent force that had intervened. The memory of the chaos was sharp, yet the image that lingered strongest was the presence of the man who had stepped into danger to protect them. She did not know his name or his world, only that he moved with a certainty that defied fear and a purpose that did not seek recognition. Her curiosity deepened with each passing day, shaping her thoughts in quiet moments and intruding on her peace like an unsolved puzzle. She noticed herself scanning the streets on her commutes, wondering if he might appear again by coincidence or fate. Although she sensed that he belonged to a realm far removed from her own, something within her felt drawn to the mystery he represented. The boss, meanwhile, remained consumed by the remnants of the gang he was eradicating. His days and nights blurred into long stretches of surveillance, strategy, and execution. Yet even in the midst of this work, he occasionally felt the faint echo of the moment he had intervened, a memory that tugged at the edges of his thoughts. He recalled the fear in the student's eyes, the vulnerability that had hardened into silence as danger surrounded them. Among those fleeting faces, one seemed to stand out to him more than the others, though he could not explain why. It was not a feeling he welcomed. Emotion had no place in his world, yet it lingered like a quiet whisper refusing to be ignored. When the gang finally crumbled, their last leaders captured or eliminated, the city experienced a rare stretch of peace. The Mafia boss stood at the center of that calm, knowing full well that it was temporary. New threats would rise eventually, and he would be there to confront them, not out of desire, but because the shadows had become his realm long ago. Yet for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of space within himself, a subtle opening where thoughts unrelated to power and territory crept in. He found himself revisiting the memory of the ambush, replaying the movements, not to analyze them but to understand why that moment felt different from the others. He encountered the young woman unexpectedly one quiet afternoon. She had been walking alone near a small public park, her steps slow, her expression lost in thought. He recognized her instantly, though from a distance he kept himself veiled by habit. She seemed unaware of his presence, absorbed by the inner conflict of curiosity and confusion that had taken root after the ambush. The boss observed her in silence, noticing details he did not usually allow himself to acknowledge in others. She carried a calmness that contrasted sharply with the violence that shaped his world, a gentleness that made her presence feel almost fragile in comparison. He intended to walk away unnoticed, but fate had a way of weaving threads without warning. A sudden commotion stirred the park, drawing both their attentions. A reckless driver had lost control of his motorcycle, skidding dangerously close to the path she walked. She stumbled back, startled, narrowly avoiding injury. Without thinking, the Mafia boss moved instinctively, closing the distance with a swiftness that revealed his reflexes. He positioned himself between her and the source of danger, ensuring the threat passed without harm. He had not planned the encounter, yet he had once again become her shield against an unexpected moment of chaos. She looked up at him with wide eyes, recognition flickering as she connected this presence with the shadowed figure from the ambush. He remained still for a moment, aware that his proximity might overwhelm her, aware also that walking away abruptly could seem cold. He maintained a distance just close enough to ensure she was safe, yet far enough to preserve her sense of space. The young woman studied him quietly, her thoughts swirling with gratitude, awe, and something warmer, something she did not yet have words for. She could not understand why someone like him existed on the edges of danger yet appeared precisely when safety was at risk. The mystery deepened, pulling her heart in directions she had never anticipated. In the days that followed, their paths crossed again, each encounter unplanned yet impossibly timely. The boss began noticing her near places he visited out of habit, though she never sought him openly. She carried herself with a blend of confidence and curiosity, and although she did not approach him directly, her presence lingered at the edges of his awareness. He found himself watching over her from afar, not as a duty, but as an instinct he could not suppress. It disturbed him at first, feeling a pull towards someone who had nothing to do with the darkness that defined his existence. She represented a world untouched by bloodshed, a realm he had long abandoned and believed forever unreachable. The young woman sensed his watchful presence, not with fear, but with an inexplicable comfort. She did not view him as a monster or a criminal, though she understood instinctively that he was no ordinary man. To her, he was a protector shaped by shadows, someone who bore burdens she could not imagine. She felt drawn not to his danger, but to the unspoken honor beneath it, the silent strength he used not for glory, but to prevent harm. Her heart formed a quiet attachment long before she admitted it to herself, an attachment built not on fairy tales, but on the raw truth of moments where life hung by a thread. As weeks passed, their connection grew in silence, bound not by words, but by presence. He continued to eliminate lingering traces of the gang, ensuring no retaliation would ever threaten the students again. With each action, he felt a growing sense of purpose that extended beyond power or territory. Protecting innocence had become something deeper, something personal. And though he did not allow himself to express the feeling, he found a rare solace in the knowledge that someone out there saw him not as a monster, but as a guardian forged in darkness. The young woman's admiration evolved into a quiet affection, a warmth that softened her thoughts whenever she recalled his silhouette. She knew nothing of his past or the battles he fought, yet she sensed the complexity in his silence. Her heart reached toward him not out of fantasy, but out of sincerity, drawn to the strength and vulnerability intertwined within him. She saw not a criminal, but a man shaped by scars and choices, a soul capable of protecting the world even while standing apart from it. The Mafia boss, for all his experience, found himself unprepared for the slow shift occurring inside him. He had built walls around his emotions long ago, walls that even death could not penetrate. Yet she had slipped through without force, merely by existing in the moments where his humanity stirred. He felt no need to possess her or pull her into his world. Instead, he simply watched over her, protecting her unknowingly through the rhythms of the city. She became a small light in the distant corners of his life, something he never sought but quietly cherished. He did not imagine a future with her, because he believed futures were not meant for men like him. But he allowed himself rare moments of reflection, imagining what life might have been if he existed in a world without shadows. When he saw her smile, even from afar, he felt a warmth that did not demand anything in return. It was enough for him to know she was safe, enough to accept that he had made a difference in at least one life without needing her to acknowledge it. The city continued to evolve around them, threats rising and falling like tides. But through it all, an unspoken bond remained, a connection formed in chaos, strengthened in silence, and carried by the unseen threads of fate. The Mafia boss returned to his world of shadows, but he did so with a heart no longer completely closed. And the young woman lived her life with a quiet certainty that somewhere in the unseen corners of the city, someone watched over her not out of obligation, but out of a feeling that had no name, yet shaped both their paths in ways neither fully understood. Their lives did not merge, yet they were forever intertwined, bound by a moment of danger that sparked a story neither sought but both carried within themselves, a story sealed not by words, but by the silent rise of love in the heart of darkness.